All right, good morning, everybody. Good morning.
Good morning.
All right. If you want to, go ahead and turn over your Bibles to Joel chapter 3. That's where we're going to be for just a moment this morning. We'll finish up this right now. I've got to fix this real quick, though. Okay. We're good. All right. In Joel chapter 3, he is continuing on with this new phase. Remember last week we talked about how there's a certain dividing line between the first part of Joel. And Joel's only 3 chapters. But about midway through chapter 2, there is this shift of terminology that Joel uses from where he has been talking about things that are happening right there in front of him, things that are happening in his present day. And then he begins to talk about things that are going to be happening. When he says things like after these things or at this time or that will happen, we see that shift happening of a prophecy that he was giving at that time for the present time to a prophecy that he's giving about something that will happen. And chapter 2 let us see some of those things that were going to happen at the establishment of the church. And if you remember anything about Joel, I think the most important thing to remember about Joel is that you have a prophecy from Joel that is directly carried out in Acts chapter 2. That's the one thing to remember. We know that to be the case because the Bible interprets the Bible with this. When Peter says to us, this is what that was, or specifically, this is what through the prophet Joel was saying. And so what they were experiencing in Acts chapter 2 is exactly what Joel chapter 2 was what he was writing about. So that's important to remember. If there's anything, like I said, that you would remember out of Joel, remember that. And so it's important to remember as well that if Joel is talking about it in chapter 2 about things that will happen, and Peter says, this is that, then anything that Joel says is not our future still. It's already something that's come to pass. All right? That's important. Always remember that when you're reading about a prophecy from the Old Testament or even in the New Testament, when it's given and we see the outcome of that prophecy, then it's not necessarily a future prophecy anymore. It was future for the time when it was written or when it was spoken, but not necessarily future for us. Sometimes we read things like this and we think, oh, I'm looking forward when this happens, when this is going to happen, when really it's already happened. All right, so that's important to remember. I'll give you a New Testament equivalent of that just real briefly. When Jesus is talking about giving the prophecy that no stone will be left unturned on the temples in Jerusalem. His disciples come into Jerusalem. They're admiring the buildings. And he says something about at the end of times when the Lord comes back that no stone will be left unturned. A lot of times people say, well, that's got to be some kind of end of times kind of prophecy that Jesus is giving about when he comes back in the final day, the judgment day. But really what Jesus is talking about is when Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 AD and how that the Roman government came in and they got rumors that there was gold hidden inside the temple, and they go in there and they didn't leave one stone unturned to find that gold. And so Jesus is giving a prophecy about something that's going to happen, not necessarily our future, but it was future for the time period when he said that. So that's just important to remember anytime you're reading a prophecy from the Old Testament or New, just think about what's being said and its outcome, and don't always just assume that it's for you as well. All right? So that's important to remember. All right, so now we get into chapter 3, and the language continues on, because here's what he says in chapter 3. He begins with this phrase, in those days and at that time. That's a phrase that he's already used in chapter 2. A phrase that's pointing to a future for Joel and a future for his hearers. All right? So that's the idea right there, that this is going to happen when God is going to restore some things. And that's the key thing right there that Joel is prophesying about in chapter 3, is that there's going to be a return to the Lord. And there certainly was. In the time that Judah struggles with their relationship with God, God sends different nations to come in to pull off a judgment upon those people. And so he would use countries like Babylon or the Persians to come in and take over or to punish Israel in a way so that they would return to the Lord. And that's what happens. Whenever the people come out of Babylonian exile, they're sent back home. The Babylonians, here's what they would do. They would come in, take over your land, and they would bring you out of everything you've ever known and move you somewhere else. That's why Daniel goes to Babylon. Daniel is from Judah, and he leaves and is now living in Babylon and does well in Babylon. He serves the king and serves many kings, actually. But after that time, when the Jews were scattered all over because of Babylon, they eventually, the next kingdom comes in, the Medes and the Persians, and they send them home. They send them back. Go back to Jerusalem. And they're able to go back to their lands and rebuild the city and rebuild the wall. That's why you have Ezra and Nehemiah. These men, these prophets that are coming in and encouraging the people to rebuild and to work together to rebuild Jerusalem. So they have this return back to the Lord. And that's what Joel is prophesying about. All right? So let's read just a little bit. Let's read verses 1 through 3. He begins and says, like I said, and I've already read this phrase or whatever, but we'll read it again. For behold, in those days and at that time, when I restore the fortunes of Judah and Jerusalem, I will gather all the nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat. Then I will enter into judgment with them there on behalf of my people and my inheritance Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations. And they have divided up my land. They have also cast lots for my people, traded a boy for a harlot, and sold a girl for wine that they may drink. All right, so what do we have right here? Well, the first thing that we need to realize is that this is a broad period of these last days that's initiated by that ascension of Jesus and the birth of the church and the day of Pentecost. That's what we find there. And again, like I said, it was fulfilled with the people when they came back from Babylonian exile. And it's going to be fulfilled when God will gather all the people, including the church. So here's a piece of this where we have an immediate fulfillment of this prophecy. And then we have a broader sense of that prophecy. And that's the idea that's found right here. It's not just for Joel to listen to this, but also we listen to this prophecy as well. Not just the hearers of Joel, but even we look at this and see, oh wow, this even points to how God gathers all the nations. So Joel's prophesying about how God's people is going to come out of Babylonian exile and be coming back to the Lord. And then it's also pointing to the fact that even after Jesus' ascension, we all kind of come together as one nation, the people of God, Gentiles and Jews. And that's an interesting thing to think about, because the gospel is not for just the Jews now, is it? But it's also for the whole world, So when he says he gathers all the nations, that's something that we should we should pay attention to. It's a red flag for us to think about for a moment as we go into that. The phrase, the Valley of Jehoshaphat, is an interesting phrase. The Valley of Jehoshaphat is figurative. That's one thing that you need to realize. People may be searching high and low, maybe like Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. I don't know. But they're looking for this Valley of Jehoshaphat. Where is this taking place? Well, there's not a Valley of Jehoshaphat. It's a figure of speech. The name Jehoshaphat means judgment. It means judgment. God will judge, matter of fact. And we see that language carried on even in the phrase that in the passage that we've already looked at, and even further on in this chapter, this idea of judgment. And so this Valley of Jehoshaphat, don't be looking for it on a map. You're not going to find it. You're not going to find it. It is a figurative phrase that's used. And so he goes on to say that this is a judgment of all the nations. A judgment of all the nations. All right?
You want to see a picture?
Have you got did they give you a Valley of Jehoshaphat?
It's the whole valley where Jerusalem.
Oh, okay, so there you go. It's whole valley. Yeah, sure, that'll work. They couldn't pinpoint it, so they just gave you this big, long, big, huge place. Yeah, there you go. That's a good way of looking at it, I guess. Yeah, the thing is it's true because God does judge in that area for sure, right? Good stuff. All right, so God is assuring his people that all the nations will be dealt with. And that's encouragement for the Jews. They may be thinking, I don't know how this is all going to play out. Sure, we rebelled against God, but man, those Babylonians are evil. Those Assyrians are evil. How is God going to punish them? Well, he's going to deal with them, and just hang tight. Hang tight. He's going to handle all the minutia of how the judgment should be dealt out for all the nations. And he knows what to do. So he's just assuring his people that the nations are going to be dealt with for sure. All right. Did you see this phrase right here? They have cast, they cast lots for my people, traded a boy for a harlot, and sold a girl for wine that they may drink. That is... They view humanity as possessions, or there's no dignity in anybody else. They don't see the value in other humans, and especially they take advantage. Those other nations take advantage of those who are less fortunate and those who are the weakest in a society. Just a boy. I'll trade in my son so that I can have one night with this prostitute. That's the idea. Isn't that horrible? That's horrible. Sell my son off so that I can have this quick gratification. And that's the idea behind that. Or I'll sell off my daughter for just a quick drink for that lasts that long, right? That's the idea behind it. Is they have no integrity when it comes to viewing other people enough to where even their own people. I'll just trade the boy off for a one night stand, or a girl for that one last drink that I may have. How horrible of a situation!
Which is no different than today, really.
Oh, right, exactly. That's exactly right. Not just here in America we say, well, they don't necessarily do that. Well,
places they do.
Sure, they may do that, but also like. In long term, think about it, how a mother just doesn't take care of their kids because she's addicted to drugs. That same kind of thing that happens in our society as well, but maybe over a longer period of time. It's a good thought. It's not a good thought. It's a bad thought that we have to deal with that, but it is right there in the Bible. That's the R-rated part of the Bible right there, if you're wondering, All right. Any questions or comments about verses 1 through 3? All right, let's keep going then. It continues on with this idea of returning back to the Lord. Let's read verses 4 through 6. It says, "Moreover, what are you to me, O Tyre, Sidon, and all the regions of Philistia? Are you rendering me a recompense? But if you do recompense me swiftly and speedily, I will return your recompense on your head. Since you have taken my silver and my gold and brought my precious treasures to your temples and sold the sons of Judah and Jerusalem to the Greeks in order to remove them far from their territory. All right, we'll stop right there for just a moment. There's a little bit to unpack right here. Again, he's already said something about how he's going to deal with the nations. Now he gets a little bit more specific and starts listing out some of these regions. Tyre, Sidon, and the regions of Philistia. This is all Palestine area, for one thing. This is still all in that Mediterranean, especially on the coast. That's the coastal side of it all. The Philistia is the coastal side of it. But he's going to get even more details about the certain countries right here as well. So God virtually challenges the nations to come up against him or his people. You think you can do this? What are you to me? What are you going to do? That's what he's asking. What are you going to do? Come on. You think you can, render me a recompense? This is sarcasm that God has given to them through Joel. And so he vows to return this retaliation upon their head to those who come against him or to his people. You think you're going to do that to me or to my people? I'll show you what I can do. I'll show you. If you notice what he says, but if you recompense me, in other words, you try to get me back swiftly and speedily. Woo, that's powerful words right there. Swiftly and speedily. It's like the float like a buffalo, float like a butterfly, sting like a bee kind of situation. God knows how quickly he is on his feet, and he can get those people back even faster. The idea of being swift is being light on your feet. That's the float like a buffalo. I keep saying buffalo. There's not a buffalo that's light on its feet at all. A butterfly, he's swift, just really light. Just seems to just flutter around, fleeting, that's the idea that's right there. And then speedily, in other words, haste. Does anybody have haste in that verse right there? The word hastily or anything like that? Okay. What'd you say? Speedily. Okay. Yeah. It's the idea of being haste. It's being quick. In a hurry. That's another way of looking at it. In a hurry, for sure. All right. So you think you can get God back? I'll show you what I can do. And so the nations treated God's people with contempt and had no sense of their worth at all. All right. Well, I wanted to mention, did I say something? Okay, good. I wanted to mention something about this down here. Verse 6, and sold the sons of Judah and Jerusalem to the Greeks. Does anybody have anything besides Greeks right here? Anybody have the word sons or the phrase descendants of Javan? Anybody have that? You do? In a footnote?
Yeah.
Okay. In a footnote, it's there. This is so interesting to me. It really is. It's interesting to me, not because I find something just radically neat about Joel, but just investigating who these people are. So, who are the three sons of Noah? All right. Shem, Ham, and Japheth. All right. Shem settled in what land? What would we say? Does anybody remember? All right, let's go over to Genesis chapter 10, I believe is where it's at. Yeah, Genesis chapter 10. I don't want to spend a lot of time here. Sometimes I can chase rabbits when I'm studying and I find something that's kind of neat. And I want to share it with you just because it's fun. Just to kind of tie some things together. You learn something, All right, so Genesis chapter 10, we find the descendants of Noah. These are the records of the generations of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the sons of Noah. The sons were born to them after the flood. And sons were born to them after the flood. The sons of Japheth were Gomer, Magog, Madai, and Javan. All right, so here we have our reference back to what Joel is saying to the Greeks, the descendants of Javan, Tubal, Meshech, and Tiras, the sons of Gomer, and it goes on and on and on. Notice what it says, verse 5. From these, the coastlands of the nations were separated into their lands, everyone according to his language, according to their families and their nations. And then it says the sons of Ham were Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. The sons of Cush were Seba, Havilah, Sabta, and Ramah, and Sabteka. And the sons of Ramah were Sheba and Danan. Okay, so let's keep going here. Where does it give us? Okay, verse 21. Also to Shem, the father of all the children of Eber, and the older brother of Japheth, children were born. The sons of Shem were Elam and Asher, and but that's a hard one right there. Arpachshad. There you go. I don't know. All right, so here's the idea behind this. This is just interesting to me, and I don't know if this is true, but I do feel like it has some merit to it for sure. So you've got three sons of Noah, right? And you've got Shem, Ham, and Japheth. All right? So the descendants of Shem are considered to be those that settled in Asia. All right? This would include the Jews and all of Palestine and that whole area right there. All right? Then you've got Ham, which would be considered the African descendants. Okay? And then you've got Japheth, which are into the descendants of, I guess I should just say into Europe. All right? The Caucasian idea behind that. All right? So genetically, scientists can take human beings and divide them up into three categories. And I think that fits with what the Bible says too. Okay, so because you've got these three guys here in Genesis chapter 10 that all separate. Did you see what it says? Separated to these coastlands, verse 5. They all spread out and they go somewhere. So Japheth, right here, Europe, and he has a son named Javan. How's it spelled? Javen? A-N. Okay, Javan. And they are the Greeks. And so then you think about historically how the Greeks, through all of the history that we read, the Greeks came in and influenced heavily the Jews, and I think you see some of that right here in Joel chapter 3. All right, so let's go back to Joel chapter 3 and kind of read that context again in that with this in mind. Okay, so that is verse 6. Is that right? Yeah. And the sons of sold the sons of Judah and Jerusalem to the Greeks in order to remove them far from their territory. Sounds very much like what happened to the Jews, and that actually happened through the in history that we find. But anyway, I just thought that was interesting because I was like, who are these people? That's what I wanted to know. Who are these people, the descendants of Javan? And you go all the way back to Japheth. It points us all the way back to Noah. I just thought that was interesting. Maybe I'm weird. All right? All right, let's keep reading then. I've already read that part. Verse 7. It goes on and says, Behold, I'm going to arouse them from the place where you have sold them and return your recompense on your head. Also, I will sell your sons and your daughters into the hand of the sons of Judah, and they will sell them to the Sabeans, to a distant nation, for the Lord has spoken. All right, so this is God giving a judgment upon all those nations who brought terrible judgment upon the people of Israel, which God used in his mind, in his will, to bring judgment and get the people of Israel right again. But still, just because God uses you to do this evil thing, to bring this judgment upon Israel, doesn't necessarily mean you're going to go without being punished. And so they still need to be punished for what they've done because of how evil they are. And so God's saying to them, I'm going to take care of those other nations that are evil. Israel doesn't need to worry about it. Judah doesn't need to worry about it. I will take care of it. So anyway, I think that's really interesting. The Sabians were an ancient people group that are mentioned in the Bible that are coming from a nation far away from Israel. They were a people of stature. Isaiah chapter 45 mentions them in verse 14, and it's a rival nation to Israel. Job chapter 1 verse 15 mentions it as well. And they lived in the land of Sheba, which archaeology suggests that was a Semitic trading state that existed about 1,000 years in the area that is now what we call maybe the country of Yemen, something along those lines. Anyway, I just think it's interesting. So remember at the very beginning of chapter 3, he just mentions, I'll deal with all these nations. Then he begins to get a little bit more specific with what nations he's dealing with in the middle of chapter 3. And that's interesting. All right. So God's going to repay them with the contempt that they put upon his people, vowing to return that retaliation upon their own head. All right, let's look at verse 9 through 10. 9 through 10. Here's what it says. Proclaim this among the nations. This needs to be told, is what he says. Proclaim this judgment. What I've said, they need to know about it. Proclaim this among the nations. Prepare a war. Rouse the mighty men. Let all the soldiers draw near. Let them come up. Beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. And let the weak say, I am a mighty man. So God has challenged the nations. Come on, let them know. Tell them. See if you can come up against me. Go ahead, prepare for war. I'll show you what's going to take. Rally the troops. Get everybody together. I think this is interesting. He tells them, make the garden tools into weapons. Notice what he says, the plowshares into swords, the pruning hooks into spears. And sometimes you could probably take even just a simple garden tool and make it into a pretty good weapon anyway, right? My kids always joke around about some of the garden tools that we may have. They say, if a zombie apocalypse happens, this is the tool that I'm going to use to protect myself, right? You can take some of those things. Well, here God's saying, okay, take your crop things, the things that you use in the garden, the things that you use to farm, and make them into weapons. Form them into weapons and come up against me. Go ahead. I dare you to do so. And those who are weak, they can become strong. Let them come up. Let that weak person say, I'm a mighty man. Look at the tools that I have. And God says, bring it on. Bring it on. I'll show you. I'll show you. All right, verse 11 through 13. 11 through 13. He says, hasten and come all you surrounding nations. Again, just notice this phrase right here. And you're going to really see it in verses 11 and 12. And what I do in my Bible, I'm an underliner. And so I like to see the patterns that are there. And I underline those patterns. So here he says, begin in verse 11. Hasten and come all you surrounding nations. Gather yourselves there. Bring down, O Lord, your mighty ones. Here it is again, verse 12. Let the nations be aroused and come up to the valley of Jehoshaphat, which is a phrase we've already dealt with. He says, for there I will sit to judge. See, that kind of points to us exactly what is happening there in the valley of Jehoshaphat. And then again, all the surrounding nations. All the surrounding nations. So there's a pattern there. Hasten and come, all you surrounding nations. Let the nations be aroused. All the surrounding nations, come up here, and I will judge you. I will judge you in the valley of Jehoshaphat. Basically, literally, it would be in the valley of where the Lord judges. And is there one place that God judges? No. God's judgment is not limited to a place. That's how we know it's figurative as well. God's judgment is anywhere and everywhere. So in this place where I can execute my judgment, that's where I'm gathering all these nations up. And so though the nations will come against God and his Messiah, even those who are going to be on his side, the Messiah, with every weapon and the most positive frame of mind, it's all for nothing. You think about even today, people may say, I'm going to destroy the church. I'm going to tear it down. Well, good luck with that. For God said, Jesus says, the gates of Hades shall not prevail against this kingdom that he's going to build, this church that he's going to build. And really what that means is the gates of Hades, it's not the gates of hell. That's the way I think the King James translates it. But it's the gates of the grave. And the idea is that even death does not destroy God's church. Even if the church was to be completely obliterated and no longer exist, which that would be the end of times, the church continues on living in heaven with God, and we have nothing to worry about. Death does not destroy the church. Matter of fact, Jesus overcame death so that the church would be everlasting. It's an everlasting kingdom. That's what's behind it. They'll be plucked like a ripe harvest and crushed in judgment. Did you see this? Verse 13, I didn't read it just yet. He says, put the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Come, tread, for the winepress is full. The vats overflow, for their wickedness is great. It's time. I'm going to go through there and I'm picking everything up. It's ready for harvest. But this is not a good harvest that we would think, oh good, this is all, the fruits of my labor. God says, all right, I'm taking you off the vine. So a tomato, sits there on the vine and it gets all of its nutrients off the vine, right? You pick that tomato off of it, immediately that tomato begins to die, right? I mean, if you were to take that tomato and you just leave it out, it's not going to make it that much longer. You're going to have to, it'll ripen even more. Before too long, it just becomes mush. God says, I'm going to take you off the vine. The thing that's giving you life, I'm taking you off of it. It's a judgment upon them. The harvest is ready. That's the idea behind it. And I'm going to execute judgment. All right. Verse 14 through 17. Multitudes. Where? What does your version say? In where? In the valley of decision. All right, so this again points to the valley of Jehoshaphat. All right? The valley of judgment, where God's going to give judgment. Decision, judgment, it's the same. So in the multitudes in the valley of decision. For the day of the Lord is near in the valley of decision. God's going to bring judgment upon those nations. He's going to bring judgment upon them. The sun and the moon grow dark, and the stars lose their brightness. The Lord roars from Zion, and utters his voice from Jerusalem. And the heavens and the earth tremble, but the Lord is a refuge for his people, and a stronghold to the sons of Israel. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God, dwelling in Zion, my holy mountain. So Jerusalem will be holy, and strangers will pass through it no more. All right, so this is a beautiful piece right here. Beautiful thought. Multitudes and multitudes of people will be judged. And in the immediate context, the immediate fulfillment of this is found in how God judges the nations that have brought turmoil upon Israel and on Judah. But for us, I can't help but think, right, about how God is going to deal with evil in the end days. God is going to make a decision. He's going to split, Jesus says, split those who are goats and those who are sheep. And those who are goats, those who are evil, those who have done evil, they'll be cast away, put into the lake of fire. That's the decision that's already been made. You're evil, that's what's going to happen. The decision's already been made. Judgment has already come. It really has. That judgment day hasn't, but the judgment of punishing evil, that's a decision that's already been made. Goodness, that decision's been made too. Jesus says, those who are faithful, you'll enter into the joys of your master, right? Those who were good, those who did good, those who obeyed God, they received the goodness of judgment, of that decision. But here they are in the valley of decision. It says, for the day of the Lord is near in the valley of decision. So Joel looked out upon the valley of Jehoshaphat, the valley of decision, and saw multitudes facing their eternal fate. And truly it was a valley of decision, and those who fought against the Lord were on the wrong side of it in that valley. And the Lord will be a shelter. He'll be a place of protection for the people of Israel, or for Judah, and will restore both his people and his city to glory. This is the end outcome of what happens to evil and what happens to good. He does it right there in the immediate context of Joel, and also in the broad context of our complete worldview of how God is going to deal with evil. He knows what to do. Did you see this? Verse 16. The Lord roars from Zion. Let's see, I think it has it. Yeah, it does. It roars from Zion. That's verse 16. His voice, he utters his voice from Jerusalem. That's Hebrew parallelism at its finest. It's the same. It's saying the same thing twice in different words. And then he says, he gives them hope. The Lord is a refuge for his people, a place of protection, a place of shelter, and a stronghold. That's another one. A place of safety, a fortress, if you will. And he says, then you'll know. You'll know that I am the Lord your God. Notice this. Dwelling in Zion. Here's some more Hebrew parallelism right here for us. Dwelling in Zion, my holy mountain, Jerusalem, verse 17. So Jerusalem will be holy. It ties all three of the ways of looking at Jerusalem together, that area. Zion would be Mount Zion, which is Jerusalem. Jerusalem was built upon a mountainous area, Mount Zion. It's a holy mountain, a holy mountain. And then he says Jerusalem will be holy. And notice this, and strangers will pass through it no more. No more. No more will they have the Babylonians or the Assyrians in there. Now, if we were to take this prophecy and say, well, this has to be exactly what's happened, well, then we would look at Jerusalem today and say, well, then God's plan didn't work out, because how many people are of a non-Jewish descent that live right there and have taken over in Jerusalem? Right? A lot. It can be a horrible situation with how many people are there, right? Well, it's not necessarily just that. The idea, think of it as the broader aspect. Two ways of looking at this. Number one, you can look at it as in the church. The people of God no longer will have this idea of people that are outsiders being a part of the people of God. No more of that. And you can also look at it, the second way is those who, when we're in heaven, this new Jerusalem, this new Zion, and we sing Marching to Zion, a wonderful city of God. Anybody that's evil will not be in heaven, right? They don't get to go in. That makes sense, right? Strangers will no longer pass through it. So it's three ways of looking at this: in the immediate context, and then also in the church and in heaven. Outsiders, strangers, foreigners, they don't get to be a part of the people of God any longer. No more. And that was a problem that Israel faced. Israel intermarried with people that were outsiders, and it caused them trouble because they did that. And they had to deal with idolatry because the influence that those outsiders would bring into the people of God. And God says, I'm going to purify you all over again. And that happened with the church. All right. Verse 18. Verse 18 through 19. It says, in that day, and again, this is another phrase that is very similar to what we saw, where he says at the very beginning, in these days, in that day, this is a futuristic event. In that day, the mountains will drip with sweet wine, and the hills will flow with milk, and all the brooks of Judah will flow with water, and the spring will go out from the house of the Lord to the to the valley of Shittim. Egypt will become a waste, and Edom will become a desolate wilderness because of the violence done to the sons of Judah, in whose land they have shed innocent blood. All right, so we'll stop right there and just talk about this for a minute. After God's final victory, there is a lasting abundance in the days of the drought. You think about the very beginning of Joel. Remember how horrible it was? The locusts coming in and they ate everything, and everything is just devastated. That's not the way it is at the end of Joel. God says, I'm going to take care of you. That memory of how it used to be, it's fading. You don't have it anymore. You won't even think about it anymore. Guess what's going to happen? Mountains are going to drip with sweet wine. You'll have plenty. The hills will flow with milk. You're going to have all the cattle, everything that you need. It's all going to work out. The brooks of Judah will flow with water. No more drought. Spring will go out of the house of the Lord to water the valley of Shittim. The Shittim is located on the eastern side of the Jordan River to the north of the Dead Sea. And it was where King Moab sent his young women to the men of Israel to try to seduce them into idolatry and sexual immorality. This is from Numbers chapter 25. It was also the launching place for the armies of Israel when they set out against Jericho and Canaan in the days of Joshua chapter 2 and chapter 3. And so when water from the house of the Lord flows down to the valley of Shittim, which Shittim is this word for acacias, these trees. That's the idea, these beautiful trees. You've seen them. I can't draw with a flip, but I can try it, right? I'll try a little bit. Have you seen those trees over in Africa that are just big, nice trees that overshadow large areas? Isn't that beautiful? I'm just such a great artist. Do you know what I'm talking about? I should have put up a picture of what an acacia tree looks like, right? You seen those big ones that are just large areas? Well, water from the house of the Lord is going to provide for these trees. A beautiful thing. And the idea is that God's grace, His provision, covers everything. All right? And so every sin, every victory, everything that they've dealt with is covered by Him. Now, the exact location of the valley of Shittim is unknown. It really is. Most scholars will place it in a different location than the encampment site on the east side of the Jordan, since the water in Joel's prophecy flows from the temple in Jerusalem, then this valley would seem to be maybe west of the Jordan. That's the idea, but it doesn't make any difference at all where exactly this is. The idea is that God's going to provide everything that they need. Let me tell you something. Anytime you're reading about water in the Bible, water is what saves every single time. Think about it. You think water destroyed in Noah's day. No, it saved Noah and his family. They got in the ark and it saved them. Water always provides for people. Provides for the people of Israel. It's the salvation for the people of Israel as they leave Egypt. They split the water. They go through it and the water crashes down and destroys the Egyptian army behind them. It saves them. Water is always used as a way of showing God's grace and His favor and His salvation. We get to the New Testament. You think water is used in the New Testament? Oh yeah, it's definitely used. All right. Is that the last bell? Oh really? Oh man. Okay. Is it really? They didn't do the first one, did they? Oh.
No, they didn't.
Well, I got cheated on that, man. I thought, well, there's the first bell. Then. Okay. You're dismissed.
See what happens when you're having fun.
I'm telling you.
Where are you going to next week?
Jonah. We're going to go into Jonah. I've got 2 verses left, don't I?
Yes.
In Jonah and Joel. I got to hit those last 2. Can't just leave it hanging. But I'll go right into Jonah.